Hi, привет, everyone. It's great to be back again for another episode of Sundays with Lenin. I always say, don't go to church. Okay, I don't say that. I just made that up. I clearly have never said this before, but think of this as a church for communists. Maybe. No, church for people who want to learn how to win and not be a total loser. So, like I said, we've started this show because you hear all these like stupid people saying something like, oh my God, you have to start locally. The squad is really doing their best. You don't know the rules. You don't know how it works in Congress and all sorts of really stupid things. And the thing about it is that one of my favorite songs, and it's from one of my favorite Star Trek episodes, where the Worf says, there's this theory of the Mobius, a twist in the fabric of space where time becomes a loop. And then Geordi says, and when that point comes, whatever happens will happen again. Well, that's kind of what's going on, basically, in that we've seen this before. The squad, we've seen this in Tsarist Russia. There were the Mensheviks, the Democratic Party in Tsarist Russia. They were the cadets. You'll see all of these kinds of characters pop up, and they do the same thing. In fact, the Washington Post editorials have not changed at all. They talk about unity. Lenin's clearly talked about how stupid the idea of unity is. And so the idea is that if you kind of know what Lenin, a winner, did in order to handle the stupidity, hopefully you can copy him and also be a winner, because we don't like losers on this show. We like winners. Okay. Well, and a happy Father's Day for everyone. I hope that everyone has a good father. And if you don't, I don't know what to say. But I don't like American capitalist holidays like this. This is like total bullshit. Like anyways, we'll talk about that later. So our guest today is Rania Kaliak, and we talk about Syria and sanctions. So most people don't really understand what sanctions are and what it does or why it is. And of course, we talk about the young Tur, the the whatever. And we talk about how they were totally wrong about everything and don't do their research. And so we do, especially how she and Rania really tears into it. And then we learn about people like the young whatever their names are, Turds, Turks, whatever you want to call them, and others like it. They're called the renegades. So Lenin trolls Kautsky. Basically, he's like we all know who Kautsky. Well, Lenin will tell, if you don't know who Kautsky is, trust me. Like if you read, like half of Lenin's pieces is about how Kautsky is a really bad person and how much Kautsky sucks. And he actually wrote, I believe, 3 books about how much he hates Kautsky and how much Kautsky sucks. The idea is that, well, the bourgeoisie utilizes renegades. So renegades are people who kind of try to be, say, they're socialists, like the Jacobin crowd or whatever. And Lenin explains how they help the bourgeoisie. So we read that. And the idea is to relate that to the modern day renegades. Look at the characteristics of what makes a renegade and how they are useful to the bourgeoisie. And then we, what is it? What is it? I forgot what we do. We then understand how to deal with them. So with having said that, if you have any funny tweets or anything you want me to, at the end, we'll do a little bit about Vietnam, because it's really annoying. It has been annoying me for a while, for the whole day. So with that, enjoy the show. We'll be back in about an hour, I think, maybe longer or shorter. And we'll put the link to the piece so that you guys can follow along. We have Rania Kaliak. She is what? I forgot the behind the headline pod, right?
No. Breakthrough news. I'm glad that you asked.
Sorry.
Breakthrough news.
I got you confused with Dan's. Sorry. He was here last week, so that's why.
Gotcha.
So, you're still in Lebanon? Like last time we spoke.
Yeah. I'm in Lebanon now. I'm in Beirut. That's why the electricity went out.
So what are you doing there?
I live here, actually. I live in Beirut. And yeah, so I get to experience all of the crazy economic collapse that's happening right now, which is, pretty terrible, but not as terrible as the kind of economic situation that Syrians are dealing with. So it's an interesting place to be, especially just being on the ground and being able to actually talk about the region that I'm in from the experience of actually being here.
Oh yeah. So have you I know we spoke about almost 8 months ago, and you were still in Lebanon then. It was just after the ship attack. But have you been able to go to Syria since then, or not really?
I haven't gone to Syria. I have the ability to go to Syria because I'm Lebanese, so it's easier for me. But I haven't been, mostly because of just COVID. But I plan to soon, now that I'm vaccinated and stuff. And, the COVID situation is kind of more under control. It was pretty out of control here a few months ago.
Oh, okay. And do you guys have the vaccines, or what's going on?
So, Lebanon has some vaccines. And so it's been able to vaccinate mostly older people. But there was a massive wave in Lebanon earlier in the year. So a lot of people also got it, which helps with, people being immune. Syria is a different story, though. Syria has, as far as vaccines go, there hasn't really been a vaccine rollout. From, almost everyone I know in Syria got COVID. It just kind of swept through the country. And in a country like Syria, where the economy is already pretty much destroyed, you can't really lock down properly to prevent COVID from spreading, because people will literally starve to death. So countries like Syria, I think a lot of other poorer countries weren't able to implement the sorts of lockdowns that, the Western countries were, because they couldn't make up for it with massive stimulus packages. Even the US was able to give some sort of stimulus to the economy. Syria doesn't have the ability to do that because it's under these crippling, insane sanctions that have been largely responsible for destroying its economy.
And they don't have, so the main difference is the hard currency that they don't have because of basically how the entire WTO is set up.
The way the whole international economic system is structured is everything's based on dollars, right?
Yeah.
What the US has the ability to do is, with countries that it dislikes, it uses things like war. And then in the case of Syria, sanctions, though of course the World Trade Organization, the IMF, the World Bank, these sorts of institutions that the U.S. essentially runs, it's able to use them to, if a country misbehaves, right, or tries to get out, or tries to challenge U.S. imperialism in any way, misbehaves, right? One way to punish those countries, or to deter them from going against U.S. interests, is to mess with their economies, because the US has the dollar, right, to back it up. Other countries, their currency, is otherwise worthless, except for its attachment to how much, it values against the dollar. And so crashing a country's economy, like the US has done with Syria, in this case through sanctions, after a decade of brutal war where the US armed and funded this collection of jihadist death squads to try and overthrow the government, that itself messed with the Syrian economy. But the sanctions have made it even worse. The Syrian currency has devalued thousands of percent. Okay. Syrian currency is worthless because of US sanctions. Syria doesn't have the hard currency as a result to purchase the kinds of things that it needs as a country. Also, entire industries in Syria are under sanction. The Syrian health minister is under sanction. People don't know that. People don't know that the U.S. put the Syrian Minister of Health under sanction.
Hold on. What does that mean for him?
It means the Syrian Minister of Health can't conduct any business with international institutions. They put the Syrian Minister of Health under sanction in the middle of COVID in 2020, just as a way to punish Syria. Syria. Let me go back like this. After 10 years of this brutal campaign to try to overthrow the Syrian government by funding these death squads all across Syria, failed, the U.S. has turned to this economic warfare of sanctions to basically punish the Syrian government for refusing to submit to U.S. demands to be overthrown and collapsed. And what those sanctions mean is that entire industries in Syria just can't purchase things, whether it's the medical industry can't purchase medical equipment, because the U.S. says under sanctions that there's all these exceptions for humanitarian issues. But it doesn't actually work like that, because once you as a country are under sanction, your central bank is under sanction, no international company will do business with you out of fear for the punitive measures, the financial punishments that they might
Okay, I see. So it's okay because they're trying to. So because the U.S. is such a large market, they don't want to get punished here. So then they're just going to be like, it's kind of like how Google.
Not just a large market. I'm talking like really say, let's take a very clear example. Okay, say I am the Syrian Ministry of Health, and we have all these public hospitals, right? Your dialysis machines that people need, you know, dialysis is for kidney, right? If you fail, your kidneys don't work, you have to get dialysis. So the dialysis machines, these kinds of machines are made using different like pieces. So you might have dialysis machines in the country, but you need to do maintenance on them to keep them functioning. Sometimes that requires, you know, importing spare parts to fix this machine or that machine, certain wires. These basic things that go into this dialysis machine come from companies that are European, typically American or Japanese, or attached to some country that is in the realm of like, you know, what America controls. And so these companies, if they look at a country like Syria or Iran, they will be terrified to sell you those spare parts, even if there's an exemption.
But these spare parts are like
these sanctions are so complicated and complex that you need like a team of lawyers to fill out the exemption paperwork, to make sure you get around all these like all this bureaucratic red tape to make sure that you don't violate the sanctions. So if I'm a company and I sell this spare part that you need for a dialysis machine, the mere fact that your country and your central bank are under sanction will basically deter me from doing business with you. That's what's happening. Is the companies around the world, when a country's under sanction, even if there's humanitarian exemptions, immediately just will not do business with that country, because who wants to pay all the, you know, you don't want to get caught up in financial penalties, because financial penalties for violating US sanctions or EU sanctions are massive. So it's better just to not bother. Right. And instead of having to pay millions or hundreds of millions of dollars because you violated some US sanctions law because you forgot to dot an I or cross a T. So that's basically like when the US State Department the Treasury Department's always like, oh, you know, I don't know why people are complaining. Like, there's all these exemptions for humanitarian aid. No, your exemptions are meaningless because companies won't do business. And I'm not saying this. Like, there's been studies on this, on the sanctions in Syria, on sanctions all around the world, whether it's Iran or Venezuela. And what you see time after time is that companies and humanitarian organizations complain they can't get computers. Like, they can't get, you know, basic materials to fix cars and trucks, because Syria doesn't produce these things. Like, no country produces these things. There's an international, you know, supply chain, a lot of which links to or through American and European companies. And so that's one of the ways that the US is able to strangle these countries while pretending that's not what it's doing.
And most Americans are not going to take the time to actually look at exactly this. And that makes a lot of
well, wait, Asha, there's one more thing I want to add about Syria, because we're talking about like the way that the US economically strangles it. With Syria, there's also the issue of a third of Syria is essentially occupied by US proxies. You know, in the case of northern Syria, it's under which is Idlib and its surrounding areas. It's under the control of either the Turkish army or of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is led by the former Al-Qaeda leader of the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, Mohammed al-Jalani, right? And then more importantly, you have the northeast of Syria, where the Kurdish proxies, the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is basically just another name for the YPG, or the Syrian brand of the PKK.
Janet, I'm going to send you a video where they...
The one that I think is most discussed and most misunderstood is the evolution with our counterpart in Syria, the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces. Now, interestingly, they came about that name because at one point in time, and I dealt with them directly, I was in on the formative stage of the relationship with these guys. They formerly called themselves the YPG, who the Turks would say equated to the PKK. You're dealing with a terrorist enemy of mine. How can you do that, ally So we literally played back to them, hey, you got to change your brand. You know, what do you want to call yourself besides the YPG? And with about a day's notice, they declared that they were the Syrian Democratic Forces. I thought it was a stroke of brilliance to put democracy in there somewhere. But it gave them a little bit of credibility. And the interesting part, and I was lucky to have a great partner in Brett McGurk out there with me about the same time, because they were asking for things that I couldn't give them. And it literally was an acknowledgement that they were the demographic dominant force in northern Syria. They wanted a seat at the table, whether it's at Geneva or Astana or wherever talks are happening about the future of Syria. And because they had been branded as PKK, they could never get to the table. So while we paired with them militarily, Brett McGurk was able to keep them in the conversation and allow them the necessary legitimacy to be good partners for us. So it was literally something, I need you militarily. Hill, the diplomat here, will deliver an entree, if nothing else, for you to be legitimate, from a state standpoint, right, or from at least a governance standpoint later on. We tripped to that one. So to your point, how do you find these guys? We tripped to them when some of you may remember there was a town called Kobani. I had to find it on the map. I had no idea where Kobani was, but it was identified to us as just about to be on.
Perfect timing. So the U.S. basically backed the YPG, which is the Kurdish Syrian affiliate of the PKK, which is kind of like this cult that a lot of Western leftists are really romanticized for whatever reason. But I'm not going to get too much.
Of all the Vice articles with
not just Vice. I mean, all the Jacobin articles, like the Jacobin's really into the PKK or the YPG too.
All of them are. And my Twitter account once got mass reported by. All I said is maybe they shouldn't have they did something horrible, like kidnapped children as child slave, something, I forgot what it was. So, but I said that, and then they all came. And so I know that they have a very strong American leftist lobby, and they don't seem to understand that if NATO is funding it and the CIA and Israel, it's probably not an anarchist paradigm.
Yeah, I mean, there is something to be said that yes, the YPG did definitely fight ISIS, and they should definitely be acknowledged for that. And they also never fought the Syrian government. That never happened. There was never, there was never a fight between the YPG or the SDF and the Syrian government. They got involved in the war because ISIS took over areas, which is the U.S.'s fault. And then they took aid from the, basically military help from the U.S. to fight ISIS. That said, that doesn't justify what they're doing now, which is they've made this alliance with the U.S. to keep control of this area. The area they control in northeast Syria is the breadbasket of Syria. It's where the wheat is produced. It also has the biggest oil fields in Syria. So because now that this war with ISIS is over, their ongoing collaboration with the U.S. government is essentially balkanized Syria further, and they're denying the Syrian state and thereby the Syrian people access to their own wheat and to their own oil. And that's the purpose of the U.S.
And the oil is what the Syria used to export for hard currency, right?
Well, yeah, or to use for its own purposes, right? To use for its own country. Syria now has fuel shortages because it doesn't have the hard currency to purchase its own oil from America's Kurdish proxies. Because that's who's in charge of that area now, with the overseen by something like 2,000 American military personnel. And so they are staying there in order to basically deny the Syrian government the ability to have access to its own fuel and its own wheat. And it can still access it by buying it back. Huh? It would be like if some American separatist group took control of an oil producing area of the US that also produces food, and then force the US government to buy that back from them. That's what's happening in Syria, if that makes sense. So the Syrian government can't even purchase it. It can't purchase it shouldn't have to. The Syrian government shouldn't have to purchase back its own fuel and its own wheat. But that's the situation the Americans created, and the sanctions have made it so that they can't even afford to do that. They don't have the hard currency to make those purchases. So the vast majority of the millions of Syrians that live inside government-held Syria have to deal with these massive electricity blackouts. There's no electricity.
Rations too?
They have to wait for hours to get fuel and gasoline for their cars, if any is available. And this also destroys the country's ability to actually move food around the country too, by the way. So that's what also something similar the US is doing, is imposing on Venezuela, right? Like Venezuela's an even crazier case, because Venezuela is the most oil rich part of the Western Hemisphere. It has the most oil reserves, yet it constantly has fuel shortages. Like that is only happening because Venezuela, its oil needs to be refined. And to refine its oil, it needs certain chemicals. And the US has sanctioned Venezuela's ability to access the chemicals to refine its own oil. So that's how you have this country that is sitting on top of so much oil with these fuel shortages. It's insane. It would be like Saudi Arabia having a fuel shortage.
That would be great. I'd love that.
And that's completely manufactured by the US. And again, with Venezuela, this prevents the ability of trucks to move food across the country. Because you've seen these news reports where trucks will just have to stop in the middle of the highway because they have no more gas.
Yeah.
And they have nowhere to get gas because there's no fuel. That's US sanctions. And I have to say, when I see these American progressives who say, oh, but Venezuela is a dictatorship, and oh, Syria is a dictatorship and they've committed war crimes, basically, repeating all these justifications that the Treasury and State Department give to justify sanctions, all I can think is oh my God, you would totally lose your shit if you couldn't fill your car with gasoline for a day. I would just love for these people to spend a single day in the life of an average Syrian or an average Venezuelan, where they don't have access to fuel. They have no AC in the middle of the summertime when it's 100 degrees outside. And they don't have any internet, their internet doesn't work. And I would just love them to just live for a few hours like that, because that's what they're justifying when they repeat State Department propaganda about these countries.
I always say it's because of laziness. I mean, yesterday somebody asked me to bring a guest about Myanmar. And I said, well, the problem is that I don't trust anyone. So I have to spend the next 6 months researching the past 100 years of history before I can find a guest I can trust. But it's sheer laziness on a lot of these American journalists' part, because these are things they just don't care to find out. And they are trying to just okay, we'll just mention this name. I don't care. Yesterday, I found a clip of John Idarola saying that this Venezuela and Cuba signed this Latin American version of NAFTA. And I'm you don't have to comment if you have not read what the trade deal says. It is there's no reason why you had to comment there. You could have just said, I don't know what the deal is, and moved on. So it's they're, well, okay. And one more example, I'm just going to go right. Okay. Anna Kasparian claimed that China was limiting, doing something with forcing people to sing the national anthem or something really stupid.
Don't we have to do that in America every day if we go to school?
This is even sillier. What it was that China was giving Hong Kong a broadcast license, and it asked the government to play it inside of a government building on 2 days, some 2 days, but it was a limited broadcasting license during sporting events. So we have exactly that. When you go to YouTube and you get a copyright violation for, we had a singer on a few months ago. He sung his own song and we got a copyright violation. That's the broadcasting.
Are you serious?
Yep, I'll send it to you.
That's so ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was, and all she had to do was download, instead of looking at the Reuters version of the law, Reuters report, she should have just clicked on the bottom of the article where they said, read the law yourself. And if she had read this, she would have known it was a limitation on a broadcasting license, which is public broadcasting is not the same as singing, right?
Right, yeah.
And so that is just sheer laziness there. There's no reason why she could not click on the link at the bottom of the article.
No, I totally agree. There's so much laziness because we have this media apparatus where people call themselves journalists, but they don't actually do any journalism. They just sit in front of a camera. And there's nothing wrong with sitting in front of a camera and commenting on things. Some people are really good at doing that, and that's fine. But it's not the same as journalism. That's not journalism. It's not going and being in a place and actually speaking, embedding into the community and speaking to people, getting to know the several sides of any given place. and like understanding the language and understanding the culture. There's nothing that can replace that. Like reading about it and watching videos about it is great, but like, just don't call yourself a journalist if you've never done any journalism. And there's just this whole like cottage industry of people that call themselves journalists who don't do any actual journalism, especially all the ones who want to talk about Syria. I'm not saying you have to go somewhere to speak about it or have an opinion about it or comment on it. But like when you're only commenting on something to like make a point in some media flame war, which is what the
is that what it was with Aaron? Okay.
Yeah, that's what the TYT people have been doing. They're just like in some media flame war with like the gray zone, or for whatever reason, like they're in a war. They're in a war with specific personalities. Okay. And that's why they're talking about Syria. And it actually infuriates me because like, you know, watching this spectacle play out over the last week or however long it's been going on, you would think that like the people of the Young Turks were the biggest victims of the Syrian civil war. Yeah. Like, that's how it's playing. Like, that's how it's coming across, like just reading through my Twitter feed. And it's outrageous because you're literally only talking about Syria to score points against someone you don't like. Meanwhile, your country is destroying Syria. Like people in Syria don't have food. People in Syria can't access medical care. People are dying of things they don't have to die from because basic treatments for basic illnesses don't exist in Syria anymore because of what the US has done to that country. People's homes have been destroyed because there was a war. And you want to sit here and talk about something that happened 8 years ago or however 5 years ago. Yeah. Like, talk about now. People can't rebuild their homes because your country is sanctioning Syria. So unless you're talking about the vicious, crippling starvation sanctions that your country has placed on Syria, like shut your mouth. Like that is literally the only thing I care to hear from you if you're an American is about what your country has done to destroy Syria. It's not your business to talk about what the Syrian government has done or what the Syrian army has done. Any side. I don't want to hear your opinion on what Al-Qaeda in Syria has done. Like, shut up. Shut up. If you're going to talk about Syria, talk about what your country has done. That's all I care about.
I have to 100%. I did not realize this. Like, I thank you for pointing that out. I had no idea that it was like, I was just like obsessing over the inaccuracies. But
sorry. I'm not addressing that to you or anything. I just like, that's like, I'm like on a rant now because watching this play out the last week has been so outrageous. Like, and it's hard for me too. Cause like, not hard for me, but it's like particularly irritating because I like live in the region and I'm just like looking around me and there's so much suffering. There's so much suffering around me from American economic policies. And it doesn't have to be this way. No. And I'm just like watching these people who are in their air conditioned studios in like LA and all these fancy cities in America, you know, acting like they know what they're talking about, and they don't know anything. And it's all about them and their egos and their ratings. And that's what's like really infuriating is you're doing this on the dead bodies of Syrians. And meanwhile, you're going to like prioritize talking about what your government hasn't, like talking about what they've done instead of what your government's done. Like, it's mind boggling. It's like during the Iraq war. Oh yeah. America's bombing Iraq. It's like, while America's just like carpet bombing Fallujah, are you going to spend that time talking about what America's doing, your government's doing, or are you going to sit there and tell me about Saddam Hussein? Like, I don't give a shit about Saddam Hussein. I give a shit about my government carpet bombing Fallujah. Sorry.
No, okay. It's fine. No, I was like saying thank you for explaining why it was happening, because I didn't connect that. They were just doing a flame war, which is even more deplorable. But this is what I say. If you don't know like basic like facts, like history or anything, like if you don't know the difference between Sunni and Shia, just shut bleep up. Right. Especially if you're working for Qatar. If you're working for Al Jazeera, there is no way you can which is like Qatar is like a objectively worse government than Syria. So there's no way you should be.
And so that's always funny to me when someone who works, like, I know a lot of people who work for Al Jazeera. I respect them. I've done work for Al Jazeera before. So I'm not like bagging on anyone who's worked for Al Jazeera, but there's something particularly like ironic about somebody who works for Al Jazeera, like being super angry about another Middle Eastern dictatorship for being a dictatorship. It's like, you know, it's not the only one. Like your employer is also one.
Getting it.
Right.
And your employer is a worse one because it is like literally a monarchy where 80% of the population are slaves.
Yeah, there's that too. Whereas Syria is like a country, well, it was a country of like almost 30 million people.
And it has citizens, not slaves. Like Qatar, like imports mostly Indians and Pakistanis to be slaves, and they can't leave, and they're raped. Like, it's horrible.
Yeah, no, 100%.
What irritates me most about it is that they have this, like, I don't know. Okay, well, even if it's their only thing they care about is their ego, you'd think like, okay, maybe I should not be saying things that are so wrong that some random person can fact check me like that. Like, so they don't even have enough ego to make sure that they don't look stupid. And that's irritating to me.
Yeah, that's totally true. It's like, it's actually been surprising for me to watch, like in the sense of like, you're hurting. Like, I feel like if I was friends with the people at TYT, I would call them up and be like, are you guys okay? Like, you know, you're like hurting yourselves, right? Because they just look like really petty jerks. Oh. Like they look, it's like there's a mean girl clique of progressive media. Like they just look like mean people that I don't like, you know, I'm talking like, if I was like an unbiased person who just like didn't even know what was being fought about, I would think that they seemed like really mean people.
And they are.
Yeah.
And okay, I'm just going to go on this other slightly mild rant that's kind of related to Syria, but not quite. Okay, so yes, like for example, okay, they are so lazy and ignorant with their research that like they did not know that like Cenk does not know about the whole Nazi situation in Ukraine, and
seriously,
yeah, I will play the video at the end after you leave, but I'll send it to you. Yeah, it's like there was a video where he was like wondering whether it was a Russian conspiracy, but there being Nazis in Ukraine. And I'm like, do you not know about the past 100 years of history? Anyways, so
that's so weird.
And
like,
then, Anna went to NATO and praised like all these Baltic outright fascists who are like glorifying Holocaust memorials. Like I interviewed this Lithuanian dissident. She's praised these things. Like, but I'm not saying she's a Holocaust glorifier. I know that she's just like really dumb and probably does not know enough about the fact that they have other fascists in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Like that's all it is. So it's like they don't want to know basics about the world. And if you're not curious about the world, you should not be a journalist.
Or I don't know, like I don't know them personally. And like, I can't speak to what's driving them. Like it could be ignorance and stupidity. It could be like a sort of McCarthyism that they've, you know, really absorbed over the last 4 years of Trump, you know? And it could be like, I don't know I know people have been talking about their funding stream. I'm not really sure. I can't really speak to that because I don't know specifically who's funding them. It could be all those things. I'm not sure what it is, but what I do know is I think it's dangerous in the sense that like they've really built themselves up as being this voice of progressive media and independence. And a lot of people believe that about them. A lot of people believe that when they turn on TYT, they're going to get the alternative viewpoint. They're not going to get what they see on MSNBC and CNN. And so I always think it's dangerous when like what was ostensibly some sort of like left progressive media outlet is pushing State Department propaganda, whatever the reason might be. And and it's not just them. Like, I think it's more of a cultural shift too. I mean, I look at a lot of these, you know, I was never really a huge fan of TYT.
No.
It just like, it always looked a little too, it always looked a little too newsy for me, like too MSNBC for me. I actually really used to love Democracy Now! That's where
I
think Democracy Now! Was actually always like, you know, from what I've seen of TYT, Democracy Now! Was genuinely like a left outlet. It was a real gateway for me in terms of like radicalizing me, and the kinds of people they have on, the authors they have on. That's how I learned about a lot of people who helped shape my politics. And it's been more sad for me to watch Democracy Now! Kind of go from being this really radical alternative leftist outlet to pushing State Department propaganda on Syria, on Venezuela. Well, actually, I'm not sure they've done it on Venezuela, but on Syria, on China, on Nicaragua. And that's been really sad for me because I feel like Democracy Now! Played such a vital role in educating so many people who are like in their 20s and 30s and even 40s into left politics. And so I don't know, like that, I think it's a bigger conversation to have. Like, what has happened to these outlets? Because it's not just TYT. And again, I was never a huge fan of TYT. I never really watched it that much. So maybe they were always like this. Yeah. But from the fan base they have, I get the impression that they used to be much more left. So why is there such a shift? Like, what happened? Is it, and that's a really important question, I think, to ask.
Okay. The cool thing is that the piece we have right now that Lenin wrote answers that question. It's called How the Bourgeoisie Utilizes Renegades. By the way, this was the perfect transition because I had picked out this piece like last night, and it's like you hit this point. So it's about how, so what happened is that after the Bolsheviks won, the West actually tried to do, like, first the thing is like 14 countries tried to invade. And the Bolsheviks literally tried to repel them. And then there was this Juan Guaido. Who's the Syrian? Is there a single person in Syria who's kind of like Juan Guaido? Or is it?
There was a bunch of people who tried to be, but they all got killed. Okay,
so this is Kolchak. He was a Tsarist admiral, and basically the British like gave him armies and tried to get him to Balkanize Siberia. And he was like literally like the moderate rebels, and that like they like raped entire villages, beheaded, like literally like everything you see the moderate rebels do. Kolchak did that.
Damn, that's rough.
And Mannerheim is also like the country of Finland. Actually, I don't want to bring Finnish fascists onto you, so let's cut the country of Finland. But I've had dealt with that. They get even normal Finnish people are like really upset when you kind of explain to them that Finland was aligned with Nazi Germany. They just get really
upset. They're like, no.
And then you're like, look, your Air Force has the swastika on it.
Does it really?
Year? Yeah, until last year they did.
Oh my God. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, but it's like they've been like taught some weird propaganda, like some weird like 10 level chess game propaganda that even like Finnish liberals freak out when you tell them that, yeah, you were Nazis.
Gotcha.
But this is actually a really good one because Kautsky was Lenin hates Kautsky for a very good reason, but Kautsky was the head of the German Social Democratic Party. But then once the Bolshevik Revolution came, he turned into like a total renegade. And here Lenin explains how this happens where a progressive, like he used to be very progressive until the Bolshevik Revolution happened and he became opportunistic. So in this piece, Lenin explains how. Yeah. So.
Okay. So I'm gonna read the piece.
Yeah.
By Lenin.
And then if you have a question, I don't think we need to interrupt much, but if you have a question or want me to clarify something, go for it, or else like.
I might have trouble pronouncing some things.
Oh, okay, with the names, I'll just do it. Just let me. Kolchak and Mannerheim is the two names here.
Okay, and then what's the name of this issue? This like September issue of Vorwärts?
Vorwärts, yeah. I don't. Okay. Yeah, that's a German magazine. So yeah, don't worry about that part. Just
okay. All right, cool.
Hold on, I don't have it. Yeah, I have it now. Okay, go for it.
All right, so How the Bourgeoisie Utilizes Renegades by Vladimir Lenin.
Oh, this is actually funny too, because he like after the revolution, he tried to use his real name, but then like Ulyanov, but then like these people didn't recognize it. And then he had like, there were two letters I inspected where in Moscow where it's like, you fucking idiot. My real name is Ulyanov. And then he went back, he gave up on it.
Wait, tell me, is it pronounced Karl Kautsky? I never like actually said that name out loud. Kautsky. Okay. All right. I'm going to butcher some German and Russian names. All right. Our wireless stations intercept messages from Carnarvon, Britain, Paris, and other European centers. Today, Paris is the center of the World Imperialist Alliance, and its wireless messages are therefore often of particular interest. A few days ago, on September 13, the government wireless station in the center of world imperialism reported the publication of a new anti-Bolshevik book by Karl Kautsky, the well-known renegade and leader of the Second International. The millionaires and multimillionaires.
Billionaires nowadays, but
yeah, I know. I was going to say, wow, that's like nothing now. You mean the billionaires and multimillionaires?
Yeah.
The millionaires and multimillionaires would not use their government wireless station for nothing. They considered it necessary to publicize Kautsky's new crusade. In their attempt to stem the advancing tide of Bolshevism, they have to grasp at everything, even at a straw, even at Kautsky's book. Our heartfelt thanks to the French millionaires for helping Bolshevik propaganda so splendidly, for helping us by making a laughingstock of Kautsky's Philistine anti-Bolshevism. Today, September 18, I received the September 7th issue of Vorwärts, the newspaper of the German social chauvinists.
That's a social, he means a social chauvinist is like Lenin's way of saying racist.
Ah, gotcha. German, okay, so the murderers of Karl
Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg.
And Rosa Luxemburg. It has an article by Friedrich Stampfer on Kautsky's new book, Terrorism and Communism, and cites a number of passages from it. When we compare Stampfer's article and the Paris Wireless Message, we see that the latter is in all probability based on the former. Kautsky's book is extolled by the Scheidemans and
No skates. Okay, Scheidemann was it's like some other like German liberal sellout. Those are two German liberal sellouts.
Got it. The Scheidemans and the Noskes, the bodyguards of the German bourgeoisie and murderers of the German communists, by those who have joined the imperialists of the Entente in fighting international communism, a highly edifying spectacle. And when I called Kautsky a lackey of the bourgeoisie in my book, The Proletarian Revolution and the Renegade Kautsky, our Mensheviks, those typical representatives of the Burn Yellow International, could not find words strong enough to express their indignation. But it is a fact, gentlemen, despite all your indignation, the Scheidemans of Vorwärts and the Entente millionaires are certainly not in collusion with me when they praise Kautsky and hold him up as a weapon in the struggle against world Bolshevism. In relation to the bourgeoisie, Kautsky, even if he did not realize and did not wish it, has proved to be exactly what I described him to be. Some of the more thunderous of his accusations against the Bolsheviks will show how far he's gone in his apostasy from socialism and the revolution, apostasy that hides behind the name of Marxism. Quote, Kautsky describes in detail, Stampfer writes, how the Bolsheviks always, in the end, arrive at the very opposite of their avowed aims. They were opposed to the death sentence, but are now resorting to mass shootings. First, it is a downright lie to say that the Bolsheviks were opposed to the death sentence in time of revolution. At the party's second Congress in 1903, when Bolshevism first emerged, it was suggested that abolition of the death sentence be made one of the demands in the party program, then being drawn up. But the minutes record that this only gave rise to the sarcastic question, for Nicholas II too?
That's a czar.
Even the Mensheviks in 1903 did not venture to call for a vote on the proposal to abolish the death sentence for the Tsar. And in 1917, at the time of the Kerensky government, I wrote in Pravda that no revolutionary government could dispense with the death sentence. The question was against which class a particular government would use it. Kautsky has so far forgotten how to think in terms of revolution and is so steeped in Philistine opportunism that he cannot visualize a proletarian revolutionary party openly acknowledging, long before its victory, the need for capital punishment in relation to counter-revolutionaries. Honest, Kautsky, being an honest man and an honest opportunist, quite unashamedly writes untruths about his opponents. Secondly, anyone with the least understanding of revolution will realize that here we are not discussing revolution in general, but a revolution that is developing out of the great imperialist slaughter of the peoples. Can one conceive of a proletarian revolution that develops from such a war being free of counter-revolutionary conspiracies and attacks by hundreds of thousands of officers belonging to the landowner and capitalist classes?
Hold on. The Tsarist secret police itself had 4 million people because it's really hard to keep people in slavery. You kind of have to constantly
Jeez,
yeah. And the Tsarist army was the biggest this was around the end of World War I. So there were about maybe 8 million people. Okay.
Jeez. Wow. So where were we?
Can one conceive
of a working class revolutionary party that would not make death penalty for such attacks in the midst of an extremely cruel civil war? With the bourgeoisie conspiring to bring in foreign troops in an attempt to overthrow workers' government? Everyone, save hopeless and ludicrous pedants, must give a negative answer to these questions. But Kautsky is no longer able to see issues in their concrete historical setting in the way he formerly did. Thirdly, if Kautsky is no longer capable of analysis and writes lies about the Bolsheviks, if he cannot think or even present the problem of distinctive features of a revolution arising out of 4 years of war, he could at least take a closer look at what is going on around him. what has proved to be assassination of Karl Liebknecht. I can never say this name.
Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg.
Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg by army officers in the Democratic Republic of Germany. What is proved by the escape from prison of these officers, who were given preposterously lenient sentences? Kautsky and his whole independent party, independent of the proletariat, but very much dependent on petty bourgeoisie prejudices, evade these issues and resort to sniveling condemnation and Philistine lamentations. That is precisely why more and more revolutionary workers the world over are turning away from the Kautskys.
French Social Democratic Party, McDonald's British, and Tourette's is Italian Social Democratic Party.
Okay, turning away from the Social Democrats. Yeah. The revolutionary proletariat needs victory over counter-revolution, not impotent condemnation of it. That sounds so familiar.
Yep.
Fourthly, the question of terrorism is apparently basic to Kautsky's book. That is evident from the title, also from Stanford's remarks that Kautsky is doubtlessly right in asserting that the fundamental principle of the commune was not terrorism, but universal suffrage. In my Proletarian Revolution and the Renegade Kautsky, I cited ample evidence to show that all this talk of a fundamental principle is a sheer travesty of Marxism. My purpose here is a different one, to show what Kautsky's disquisitions on the subject of terrorism are worth, whom, which class they serve. I shall cite in a full short article by a liberal writer. It is a letter to the New Republic, a liberal American journal which, generally speaking, expresses the petty bourgeoisie viewpoint. However, it is preferable to Kautsky's in not presenting that viewpoint either as revolutionary socialism or Marxism. This is the full text of the letter. And then do you want me to read the letter?
Yeah, please. This is the most important part for you because you'll see.
This is the letter he writes to.
This is the letter the New Republic writes to writes to Kautsky's journal.
Okay. Sir, the Allied governments have refused to recognize the Soviet government of Russia because, as they state, the Soviet government is or was pro-German. The Soviet government is based on terrorism. The Soviet government is undemocratic and unrepresentative of the Russian people. Meanwhile, the Allied governments have long since recognized the present White Guard government of Finland under the dictatorship of General Mannerheim. Although it appears—
by the way, White Guard is kind of like, think of him, they did exactly what the White Helmets did. So go on.
Okay. Although it appears, the German troops aided the White Guards in crushing the Socialist Republic of Finland, and that General Mannerheim sent repeated telegrams of sympathy and esteem to the Kaiser. Meanwhile, the Soviet government was busily undermining the German government with propaganda among troops on the Russian front. The Finnish government was infinitely more pro-German than the Russian. 2, that the present government of Finland, on coming into power, executed in cold blood within a few days' time 16,700 members of the old Socialist Republic, and imprisoned in starvation camps 70,000 more. Meanwhile, the total executions in Russia for the year ended November 1, 1918, were officially stated to have been 3,800, including many corrupt Soviet officials as well as counter-revolutionists. The Finnish government was infinitely more terroristic than the Russian. That after killing and imprisoning nearly 90,000 socialists and driving some 50,000 more over the border into Russia, and Finland is a small country with an electorate of only about 400,000, the White Guard government deemed it sufficiently safe to hold elections. In spite of all precautions, a majority of socialists were elected, but General Mannerheim, like the Allies after the Vladivostok elections, allowed not one of them to be seated. Meanwhile, the Soviet government had disenfranchised all those who do no useful work for a living.
As in people related to the Tsar. Okay, go on.
The Finnish government was considerably less democratic than the Russian. And much the same story might be rehearsed in respect to the great champion of democracy in the New Order, Admiral Kolchak of Omsk, whom the Allied governments have supported, supplied, and equipped, and are now on the point of officially recognizing. Thus, every argument that the Allies have urged against the recognition of the Soviets can be applied with more strength and honesty against Mannerheim and Kolchak. Yet the latter are recognized, and the blockade draws ever tighter about starving Russia. Stuart Chase, Washington, D.C.
Doesn't that sound exactly like Syria?
100%, especially when you consider the countries around it.
Yeah.
This letter, written by a bourgeoisie liberal, effectively exposes all of the vileness of the Kautskys, Martovs, Chernovs, Brantings, and other heroes of the Burn Yellow International and their betrayal of socialism. For first, Kautsky and all these heroes lie about Soviet Russia on the question of terrorism and democracy. Secondly, they do not assess developments from the standpoint of the class struggle, as it is actually developing on a world scale and in the sharpest possible form, but from the standpoint of a petty bourgeoisie Philistine longing for what might have been if there had been no close link between bourgeoisie democracy and capitalism, if there were no white guards in the world, if they had not been supported by the world bourgeoisie, and so on and so forth. Thirdly, a comparison of this American letter with the writings of Kautsky and company will clearly show that Kautsky's objective role is servility to the bourgeoisie. The world bourgeoisie supports the Mannerheims and Kolchaks in an attempt to stifle Soviet power, alleging that it is terrorist and undemocratic. Such are the facts. And Kautsky, Martov, Chernov, and company are only singing songs about terrorism, democracy, in chorus with the bourgeoisie. For the world bourgeoisie is singing this song to deceive the workers and strangle the workers' revolution. The personal honesty of socialists who sing the same song sincerely because they're extremely dull-witted does not in any way alter the objective role played by the song. The honest opportunists, the Kautskys, Martovs, Longets, and company have become honest in their unprecedented spinelessness, counter-revolutionaries. Such are the facts. An American liberal realizes, not because he is theoretically equipped to do so, but simply because he is an attentive observer of developments in a sufficiently broad light on a world scale, that the world bourgeoisie has organized and is waging a civil war against the revolutionary proletariat and, accordingly, is supporting Kolchak and Denikin in Russia, Mannerheim in Finland, the Georgian Mensheviks, those lackeys of the bourgeoisie in the Caucasus, the Polish imperialists, and Polish Kerenskys in Poland, the Scheidemans in Germany, the counter-revolutionaries, Mensheviks and capitalists in Hungary, etc., etc. But Kautsky, like the inveterate reactionary Philistine he is, continues sniveling about the fears and horrors of civil war, all semblance of revolutionary understanding and all semblance of historical realism. For it is high time the inevitability of imperialist war being turned into civil war were realized, have disappeared. This is furthermore directly abetting the bourgeoisie. It is helping them, and Kautsky, wait, where was I?
Kautsky is actually.
It is helping them, and Kautsky is actually on the side of the bourgeoisie in the civil war that is being waged, or is obviously being prepared throughout the world. His shouting, groaning, weeping, and hysteria about the civil war served to cover up his dismal failure as a theoretician. For the Bolsheviks have proved to be right. In the autumn of 1914, they declared to the world that the imperialist war would be transformed into civil war. Reactionaries of every shade were indignant or laughed. But the Bolsheviks were right. To conceal their complete failure, their stupidity and short-sightedness, the reactionaries must try to scare the petty bourgeoisie by showing them the horrors of civil war. That is just what Kautsky, as a politician, is doing. To what absurd lengths he has gone can be seen from the following. There is no hope of a world revolution, Kautsky asserts. And what do you think he uses in argument? A revolution in Europe on the Russian pattern would mean unleashing civil war throughout the world for a whole generation. And moreover, not simply unleashing a veritable class war, but a fratricidal war among the proletarians. The italicized words belong to Kautsky and are admiringly, of course, quoted by Stamfer. Yes, Scheideman's scoundrels and hangmen have good reason to admire them. Here is a socialist leader scaring people with the specter of revolution and scaring them away from revolution. But curiously enough, there's one thing Kautsky overlooks. For nearly 2 years, the all-powerful Entente has been fighting against Russia and thereby stirring up revolution in the Entente countries. If the revolution were even to begin now, even if only in its compromising stage, and in only one or two of the Entente great powers, this would immediately put an end to the civil war in Russia, would immediately liberate hundreds of millions in the colonies, where resentment is at boiling point and is kept in check only by violence of the European powers.
Yes.
Kautsky now obviously has another motive for his actions. In addition to the foulness of his servile soul that he demonstrated throughout the imperialist war, he is afraid of protracted civil war in Russia. And fear prevents him from seeing that the bourgeoisie of the whole world is fighting Russia. A revolution is one or two of the European great powers, would completely undermine the rule of the world bourgeoisie. destroy the very foundations of its domination, and leave it no safe haven anywhere. The 2-year war of the world bourgeoisie against Russia's revolutionary proletariat actually encourages revolution. Aries?
Yeah.
Everywhere, for it proves that a victory is on a world scale is very near and easy. As far as civil war among the proletarians is concerned, we have heard that argument from the Chernovs and Martovs. To assess its utter dishonesty, let us take a simple examination. During the Great French Revolution, part of the peasants, the Vendee peasants, fought for the king against the Republic. In June 1848 and May 1871, part of the workers served in the armies of the
armies that stifled the revolution.
Okay, the armies that stifled the revolution. What would you say of a man who took the line of argument? I regret the civil war among the peasants in France in 1792 and among the workers in 1848 and 1871. You would have to say that he was a hypocrite and defender of reaction, the monarchy, and the armies that stifled the revolution.
Yeah, exactly.
And you would be right. Today, only a hopeless idiot could fail to understand that what has taken place in Russia and is beginning or maturing in the rest of the world is a civil war of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. There never has been and never can be a class struggle in which part of the advanced class does not remain on the side of the reactionary forces. That applies to civil war too. Part of the backward workers are bound to help the bourgeoisie for a longer or shorter period. But only scoundrels can use that to justify their desertion to the bourgeoisie. Theoretically, this is a refusal to understand what the facts of development of the world labor movement have been screaming and shouting about since 1914. The breakaway of the top strata of the working class, corrupted by a middle class way of life and opportunism, and bribed by soft jobs and other bourgeoisie sops, began to take shape on a world scale in the autumn of 1914 and reached its full development between 1915 and 1918. By disregarding this historical fact and blaming the communists for the split in the movement, Kautsky is only demonstrating for the 1,000th time his role of lackey of the bourgeoisie. For 40 years, from 1852 to 1892, Marx and Engels spoke of the top strata, the leaders of the aristocracy, of the workers in Britain becoming increasingly bourgeoisie, owing to that country's colonial advantages and her monopolies.
Bingo.
It's clear as daylight that the 20th century imperialist monopolies in a number of other countries were bound to create the same phenomenon as in Britain.
Like the US.
Yeah, exactly. In all the advanced countries, we see corruption, bribery, desertion to the bourgeoisie by the leaders of the working class and its top strata in consequence of the doles handed out by the bourgeoisie.
Like union leaders and endorsed Hillary over Bernie, but go on.
Right. Who provide these leaders with soft jobs, give crumbs from the profits to their upper strata, shift the burden of the worst paid and hardest work to the backward workers brought into the country,
immigrants,
and enhance the privileges of the labor aristocracy as white compared people to the majority of the working class. The war of 1914 to 1918 has given conclusive proof of treachery to socialism and desertion to the bourgeoisie by the leaders and top strata of the proletariat, by all the social chauvinists, and then a bunch of names.
Okay, they're from like US, England, France, Germany. Okay, cool.
And it goes without saying that for a time, part of the workers, by sheer inertia, follow these bourgeoisie scoundrels. The Bern International of
the French, Dutch, and the Germans
has now taken full shape as the Yellow International of these traitors to socialism. If they are not fought, if a split with them is not effected, there can be no question of any real socialism, of any sincere work for the benefit of the social revolution. Let the German independents try to sit between two stools, such as their fate. The Scheidemans embrace Kautsky as their own man. Stanford advertises this. Indeed, Kautsky is a worthy comrade of the Scheidemans. When Hilferding, another independent and friend of Kautsky's, proposed that the Scheidemans be expelled from the International, the real leaders of the Yellow International only laughed at him. His proposal was either a piece of extreme foolishness or a piece of extreme hypocrisy. He wanted to parade as a left among the worker masses and at the same time retain his place in the international of bourgeoisie's servitors.
That sounds familiar. Okay.
Yeah. Regardless of what motivated this leader, the following is beyond doubt. The spinelessness of the independents and the perfidy of the Scheidemans,
the German, British, German, Dutch, French. Okay, go on.
Are bound to result in a stronger movement of the proletariat masses away from these traitorish leaders. In some countries, imperialism can continue to divide the workers for a fairly long time to come. The example of Britain is proof of that. But the unification of the revolutionaries and the uniting of the masses with the revolutionaries and the expulsion of the yellow elements are, on a world scale, proceeding steadily and surely. The tremendous success of the Communist International is proof of it. In America, a Communist Party has already been formed. In Paris, the Committee for the Reestablishment of International Contacts and the Syndicalist Defense Committee have come out for the Third International. And two Paris
so let's go to now in Britain. Those are just random names of random parties. Okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, it's not your fault. I was just trying to, because you said you had to rush. So I just wanted to, in Britain.
In Britain, we are on the eve of the organization of a communist party with which the best elements in the British Socialist Party, the Stop Stewards Committee, the Revolutionary Trade Unionists, etc., are in solidarity. The Swedish lefts, the Norwegian Social Democrats, the Dutch communists, the Swiss and Italian socialist parties stand in solid with the German Spartakists and the Russian Bolsheviks. In the few months since its organization early this year, the Communist International has become a world organization leading the masses and unconditionally hostile to the betrayers of socialism and the Yellow International of the Bern and Lucerne fraternity. In conclusion, here is a highly instructive communication that casts light on the part played by the opportunist leaders. The Conference of Yellow Socialists this August was reported in a special supplement appearing in several languages. The English edition carried an interview with how the hell do you say that?
Troelstra, a well-known leader of the opportunist.
The well-known leader of the Opportunist Party in Holland. He said that the German Revolution of November 9 had caused a good deal of agitation among Dutch political and trade union leaders for a few days. The ruling groups in Holland were in a state of panic, especially as they were practically universal unrest in the army. The mayors of Rotterdam and The Hague, he continues, sought to build up their own organizations as an auxiliary force of the counter-revolution. A committee composed of former generals, among them an old officer who prided himself on having shared in the suppression of the Boxer Rebellion in China, tried to mislead several of our comrades into taking up arms against the revolution. Naturally, their effort had the very opposite result, and in Rotterdam at one time, it seemed that a workers' council would be set up. But the political and trade union leaders believed such methods premature and confined themselves to formulating a workers' minimum program and publishing a strongly worded appeal to the masses. That is what Troelstra said. He also bragged a good deal, describing how he had delivered revolutionary speeches calling even for the seizure of power, how he realized the inadequacy of parliament and political democracy as such, how he recognized illegal methods of struggle and dictatorship of the proletariat in the transition period, and so on and so forth. Troelstra is a typical specimen of the venal opportunistic leader who serves the bourgeoisie and deceives the workers. In words, he will accept everything, workers' councils, proletarian dictatorship, and whatever else you wish.
In words.
But actually, he is a vile betrayer of the workers, an agent of the bourgeoisie. He is the leader of those political and trade union leaders that saved the Dutch bourgeoisie by joining forces with them at the decisive moment. For the facts revealed by Troelstra are perfectly clear and point in a very definite direction. The Dutch army had been mobilized. The proletariat was armed and united in the army with the poor sections of the people. The German Revolution inspired the workers to rise, and there was practically universal unrest in the army. Obviously, the duty of revolutionary leaders was to lead the masses towards revolution, not to miss the opportune moment when the arming of the workers and influence of the German Revolution could have decided the issue at one stroke. But the treasonable leaders, with Troelstra at their head, joined forces with the bourgeoisie. The workers were stalled off with reforms and still more with promises of reforms. Strongly worded appeals and revolutionary phrases were used to placate and deceive the workers. It was the Troelstras and similar leaders who make up the Second International of Bern and Lucerne. That saved capitalists by helping the bourgeoisie demobilize the army. The labor movement will march forward, ousting these traitors and betrayers, the Troelstras and the Kautskys, riddling itself of the upper stratum that has turned bourgeoisie, is misleading the masses and pursuing capitalist policies.
So do you think this answered your question or not?
Totally. I mean, I think it's a good explanation of these kinds of people who put themselves in these positions of like, I'm the leadership and voice of progressivism and leftism, but it's like, I think, I guess this kind of relates it back to the money, the foundation money, the venture capitalist money, and also the just like the value that these people are able to attract and the kinds of content they produce. And then it becomes about maintaining that like monetary reward.
Instead,
it's in their material interest.
Word comes status quo always.
Right. It's in their material interest on so many levels. It gives them establishment acceptance while also allowing them to, play this role of like radical when they're really not.
Okay. Well, one thing that Lenin doesn't really have an answer for, as far as I can tell, is like, what do we need to do? Like, do you have any ideas on what we can do in the modern context with regards to these kind of?
I mean, that's a good question. I think this is an issue of like trying to find a sustainable way to fund media that doesn't end up in the same trap of I need to depend on the Ford Foundation and like the Soros Foundation, or I need to like turn to billionaires, or I need to turn to like rich people who have certain agendas and interests to fund me, who might be connected to the DNC. And I think that people are still stumbling to try and figure out how to do that. Like, I mean, at Breakthrough News, like, I guess it's like this kind of mix of everything, right? Like you've got you've got, like you've got donors, Patreon, like you use all these different crowdfunding tools, but I don't think it's sustainable. Like, I don't think that's a sustainable model for journalism, because what it ends up like coming down to is who can entertain. Right. It's like as a result, journalism has turned into this like who could be the most controversial and the most entertaining and the funniest. And it's like, well, yeah, it's great if like you have the skill to like entertain and be a little bit funny, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a good journalist. And there's a lot of people out there who could probably be amazing investigative journalists, right? But like, maybe they're just not funny, or maybe they're not good on camera, or maybe they're not like, they can't perform. And like, and so I think that like, as media people, like we really need to like think hard about a sustainable way to do this. And this is why I think media needs to be like a public utility, but in America, it never will be, at least not anytime soon. So we're kind of stuck with this unfortunate paradigm where we just like have to rely on like readers and viewers to fund us. But again, like, I just don't think that's sustainable.
I would have to completely like, I don't know what is to be done, but yeah, you're right. The main thing is that like, the worst part is that like it attracts the most incurious people who won't question the framing at all, like who won't even like look beneath the carpet or whatever.
Right.
And wait, one quick question. I'll only keep you for 2 or 3 more minutes. Can you quickly talk about your interview with Theo Padnos?
Oh yeah. So Theo Padnos, if anybody hasn't heard of him, he is this writer who went to Syria in 2012 thinking there was this glorious revolution happening, because that's what the media was telling him and telling all of us. So he went to Syria in 2012 because he had spent some time in the Middle East, like learning Arabic and, trying to be a writer and like a reporter. And he went to Idlib, and he was like immediately kidnapped. And sold to Al-Qaeda by the FSA.
Oh my God.
Given to Al-Qaeda by the FSA, the moderate rebels, if you will. And he spent 2 years being held as a hostage, being tortured by Al-Qaeda in Syria and all of the various rebel factions that were affiliated with them, which was like all of the ones that ended up dominating and taking over. And so he got really interesting insight into the ideology of these groups, and he never saw any moderate rebels. And while he was being held in Syria for those 2 years and being tortured on a regular basis, before he was ultimately like ransomed back through the Qataris, he basically like spent all this time in these like Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra prisons with all these Syrian army officers who were like fighting them. Like, and sometimes ISIS people too, like anybody who was also being held prisoner. And so he got a lot of insight into what was happening in the prisons of this war. But then also like, there was a period of time where he was being held in the Aleppo Eye Hospital in East Aleppo that that Nusra had turned into their headquarters.
Oh, okay.
And they were torturing people in the basement. And while Theo was one of those people being tortured in the basement, Liz Sly from the Washington Post and other reporters came through and actually interviewed them, like the leaders of this group at the headquarters. And they never thought to ask, like, hey, what's going on in your basement? Or do you have hostages? Or like, and they were just portrayed in this really glorious way that they're fighting a dictator. Meanwhile,
they literally did not look underneath. Like when I thought I was just making an analogy about looking underneath the carpet, but they literally
they literally didn't look underneath the carpet. So anyways, I encourage people to check out that interview.
And we'll put a link right down here, like on the card. We'll also put the link to your Patreon. I have all the. I'll put all the links I put last time in.
All right, cool. Thank you. I appreciate that.
And thank you so much. But do you have any?
Too.
And where do people? We'll put that. And just one quick sentence, like, what are you going to be working on in terms of journalism in the future, like in the near future?
So I've got a lot of really cool content plans. Like I've been doing these like lengthy interviews with interesting people from like former hostages of Al-Qaeda, like Theo, to like really cool Marxist academics, and other journalists and just like experts on various issues, and also have some on the ground reporting planned for the region coming soon.
Nice.
So if you'd like to find that, you can follow Breakthrough News.
It's great.
And also follow my show on Breakthrough News, which is Rania Kalik Dispatches. You can also find it in podcast form on Spotify and Apple and all that fun stuff.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope this will convince at least like some journalists or some people just to like not listen to any pundits and read Lenin.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Have a good rest of the day. Evening,
You too. Bye.
Bye.